Not only is Trayvon Martin's killer still walking the streets, but he's still allowed to do so with his gun. George Zimmerman's conceal and carry license is still valid, although civil rights leaders in Florida are asking Governor Rick Scott to suspend the permit. The other Florida law you've probably heard about that factors into the killing of Trayvon Martin is the Stand Your Ground law. The law allows citizens to use deadly force whenever threatened in a place they are legally allowed to be, any place they're legally allowed to be, without first attempting retreat, hence the term stand your ground. Despite critics warning that it could lead to racially motivated killings and put the public at greater risk, then Florida Governor Jeb Bush signed it into law in 2005. According to the Legal Community Against Violence, a public interest law center dedicated to preventing gun violence, 25 states, including Florida, have stand your ground laws on the books, in large part due to the efforts of the NRA and the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC. Justified homicides in Florida are up since Stand Your Ground was signed into law, and you can see the number of justified homicides went from 33 in 2006 to 102 in 2007, down a little 93 in 2008, and back up to 105 in 2009. We don't have full data for 2010 yet. Liliana, you did really great reporting on the wave of these Stand Your Ground laws when they were being enacted, and I think they kind of flew under the radar, frankly. How did this come about? What is the sort of genesis of these kinds of laws?
Well, you know, there's a long history of sort of self-defense laws that go back to this idea, this castle doctrine, which is an old English law sort of idea that your home is your castle, you have the right to defend it. And this is, you know, existed for a long time.
It's a common law principle, in fact, that you can invoke even without any law being passed in the state.
Precisely, and that's why so many of these Stand Your Ground laws are called the castle law, like in Texas, which we'll get to. But so the idea was, you know, but these laws, what they were trying to do is to expand, broaden the circumstances under which you could use lethal force to defend not just your home or property, but yourself in sort of any situation. And this was extended to your car, you know, not just your car or things that you own, but in the case of Florida, Florida was by far the most permissive.
It was the most permissive. Yeah, and this is I think there's a few interesting points and important points to hit home here. One is the castle doctrine, which the defenders of the law want to sort of invoke, is a common law principle that this statutorily enlarges, right? I mean, it widens the scope of, first of all. Second of all, you now see the people who helped push this through, the law through, Representative Blacksley
I had nothing to do with it.
In Florida, saying, no, this doesn't have anything to do with the law. This is not because of Stand Your Ground. Jeb Bush is saying it's not covered by Stand Your Ground. But the actual police say the reason they didn't arrest him at the scene was because of the Stand Your Ground law, which sounds like a lame excuse, except for the fact that the provisions of the law are so extreme. Listen to this. This is from Michael Mannheimer, who's a law professor on Prof's blogs, and he wrote a great post about this. He said the law provides that a person who uses deadly force in self-defense is, quote, is immune from criminal prosecution. This odd provision means that a person who uses deadly force in self-defense cannot be tried, even though the highly fact-intensive question of whether the person acted in self-defense is usually hashed out at trial. The law thus creates a paradox. The state must make a highly complex factual determination before being permitted to avail itself of the forum necessary to make such a determination. It also prohibits the person from being arrested unless there is, quote, probable cause that the person actually wasn't acting in self-defense, which is, again, a bizarrely intensive factual determination to make prior to arresting someone.
It gets even worse. The law, as it's written, says police cannot even detain a suspect until there's probable cause. So normally you need probable cause to arrest somebody, but here you can't. If Zimmerman said, I was afraid for my life, he could have walked away legally, and the police can say, sir, stop, we want to ask you a few questions, and he could have said no. The law is even worse, and the people who wrote this, they always talk about the spirit of it. Okay, if you like the spirit of Stand Your Ground, fine. Actually, I'm a little bit sympathetic to that. If someone's breaking in my house, I don't have to run away.
Right.
But they have to talk about the law they actually wrote.
That's
the law
right.
makes police liable if they make a mistake.
Civilly liable, right? That's the other thing.
Absolutely. The burden is so on police not to question somebody. That is how the law is written, and that's what the police did. It's still bad policing in this case. But, I mean, what do you expect when you write this dumb law?
But I have to play devil's advocate here. The lawyer in me, I take a look at the statute, I take a look at the law. Clearly there's some problems with it, but there is nothing in what you just read to us that stops a police officer from saying to someone who is allegedly fearful of their life, What happened?
Right.
Explain to me how you were acting in self-defense when you blew Trayvon Martin away for holding Skittles and a can of iced tea. Nothing in the law can civilly or criminally hold a police officer liable for asking that question. That you can make a determination of probable cause long before you get to court. When you get to court, then it is the jury's decision to make sure that that arrest was proper, legal, and constitutional.
And we should also say that after, I mean, it certainly seems to me that after the 9/11 tapes surfaced, 9/11 tapes surfaced, it's clearly the case that you can show up at the guy's house and arrest him. I mean, that's
exactly.
the 9/11. We have the evidence. Why haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's been over a month since Trayvon Martin was shot, and the stand your ground law did not prevent the police from saying what happened.
Right. Lisa Graves from the Center for Media Democracy is going to tell us about how these laws spread throughout the nation right after we take this break. All right, right now I want to bring in Lisa Graves, the Executive Director of the Center for Media and Democracy. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Chris.
So you've been doing really great work tracking these laws and the ways in which they have sort of moved throughout the country. What is the kind of vector of infection, if you will, to use an epidemiological term? How has this happened?
Well, this is really a case study in how the American Legislative Exchange Council works. This is a bill that was literally conceived of by a paid NRA lobbyist, pushed through the legislature of Florida through the heavy hand and influence of the NRA. The NRA lobbyists took that bill to the American Legislative Exchange Council's fancy meeting in Texas in 2005. The NRA lobbyists pitched that bill to a closed-door meeting of legislators and corporate interests that was co-chaired by Walmart. That committee, the ALEC Committee on Criminal Justice, unanimously approved this bill becoming a model bill, a template for laws across the country, and that's just what's happened. In the last 5 years, this law has spread like wildfire through the states at the behest of ALEC legislators and at the behest of the NRA. This is a very reckless law, and this law is, in essence, a series of tragedies like Trayvon Martin's tragedy waiting to happen.
Yeah, in fact, there have been others, and I want to play a little bit of tape that Liliana, I first came across this case in your reporting, and this was in some ways the first kind of iconic case around stand your ground laws. It has to do with the Texas stand your ground law, and this happens in November 2007. It's a few months after the law has gone into effect. The law goes into effect September 1st. Governor Rick Perry signed it into law. And this is Joe Horn making a 911 call as he sees two people breaking into his neighbor's home. And throughout the call is basically saying, I'm going to go shoot him. I've got a shotgun. And the dispatcher is saying, do not go shoot them. No piece of property is worth shooting someone over. And this is what happens.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Why don't you listen to me carefully, okay?
Yes.
I've got officers coming out there. I don't want you to go outside that house. And I don't want you to have that gun in your hand when those officers are poking around over there.
I understand that. Okay, but I have a right to protect myself too, sir, and
yes,
you understand that.
Yes,
and the laws have been changed in this country since September the 1st, and you know it and I know it. I have a right to protect myself.
I'm right there.
And a shotgun is a legal weapon. It's not an illegal weapon.
I don't want you going outside, Mr. Horn.
Well, here it goes, buddy. You hear the shotgun clicking, and I'm going.
Don't go outside.
No, you're dead.
Both those men were killed. Joe Horn was not even arrested, if I understand, or he was arrested briefly and then let go. Liliana.
So a year after that happened, he was cleared by a grand jury. He was, so he was definitely, he got off. And what was obviously it's very chilling, but it's absolutely relevant that these men were black. They were also undocumented immigrants from Colombia. And so in Texas, if the color of their skin didn't already criminalize them, then they were doubly criminalized by their immigration status. And that became a huge flashpoint in these discussions.
Lisa Grace, the NRA and ALEC, have they partnered before? Is this an anomaly, or is this something sort of routinely you see happening?
Oh, this is no anomaly. The NRA and ALEC have long-standing ties. The NRA is a long-standing member of ALEC. They pushed through a number of bills just this past ALEC session that were part of the model bills being pushed by the NRA lobbyists. Many of those bills are being introduced all across the country, not just in this area, which the NRA likes to call the Castle Doctrine, in which ALEC scores legislators and states on whether they pass this thing. It's not about self-defense. There already is a pre-existing right of self-defense for everyone. This is about shoot first. And this is about a situation in which the NRA, through ALEC and through ALEC members, ALEC legislators, is pushing an agenda which involves not just he said, she said, but he said, and then the other guy's dead. And you don't have a witness who can counter a claim that you were attacked.
I want to talk about the sort of political soil in which the seeds of this have been planted and what this says about sort of the culture of paranoia right after we take this break.
Through time in this country, what I like to call bleeding heart criminal coddlers want you to give a criminal an even break so that when you're attacked, you're supposed to turn around and run rather than standing your ground and protecting yourself and your family and your property.
That's former NRA President Marion Hammer, who was the lobbyist who wrote the Florida bill. And in fact, one newspaper account describes her staring down lawmakers as they voted for it. I should say it passed by a wide bipartisan majority in Florida. So there's a lot of people with this bill on their hands. What I think is so interesting, there's two aspects of this I find interesting. One is the fact that basically the NRA, after 2001, Democrats basically gave up on gun control. It was a huge wedge issue, and Democrats threw in the towel. People felt that Al Gore lost Tennessee, his home state, because he had been a supporter of gun control. And there was basically a total victory. But the NRA, of course, can't just declare victory and go out of business, right? They have a huge fundraising operation. They've got these fancy offices with a gun range, outside Washington, D.C. So what they have to do is come up with ever more extreme pieces of legislation to justify their own existence, right? Because they're no longer battling defensively gun control, because really there's not that much going on in that terrain. And so this is the result of this. This is the result of the NRA needing to kind of make themselves relevant because they have to push the envelope more and more.
I was going to say I'm not like a huge fan of the NRA, but and what this woman just said is sort of scary when you look at it. But if you put yourself in the position of a reasonable person, if you are in your home and someone breaks into your home, I want the right to be able to protect my life and the life of my children. And if that means blowing them away, then you should have the right to do that. Now, that being said, we also have to remember this is a democracy. Everyone's angry with the NRA. Everyone's angry with ALEC. We should say that there are organizations all over the country that write proposed model legislation. These people are not elected by anyone to do what they do. They cannot force legislators to pass these laws. It's the legislators who are just not doing their job, and that's why so many Americans are completely disaffected with our political system.
Lisa, will you respond to that? That's a fair point.
But that's precisely not what this law does. You already have a right of self-defense in your home in every single state across the country. This is about saying that you can have vigilante justice, or really vigilante injustice, out on the streets. That's what happened in Florida. It's a natural result of this law. It's the type of situation that Marion Hammer, the NRA hired gun lobbyist, dismissed as hysterical. It's not hysterical. It's what's happening in states across the country where these laws pass. And ALEC is the vehicle, one-stop shopping for groups like the NRA, which help bankroll ALEC, which is largely corporate funded, which creates these model bills that then are pushed in states across the country by eager ALEC legislators, in part who are funded by the NRA or who fear that the NRA will attack them with its enormous war chest of funds if they don't do what they say. And quite frankly, this is exactly as you say, Chris. This is a situation in search of a solution in search of a problem, because you already have a right of self-defense. The NRA is using hypothetical examples to push these rules through to expand vigilante activity across the country, in my view, and they have the political muscle to do it.
Let me make one more point just on that and Michelle's point. There's a theory in political science that's called lobbying as legislative subsidy, right? That basically what lobbying is it gives a subsidy to the lawmakers you support, and that legislative subsidy, which is the time, effort, brain power, technical expertise made in crafting a bill, is incredibly important at the state level, where you have part-time legislators. I don't know how much time you spent in state houses, but you go in, there's not a ton of staff. I mean, there is not a ton of staff. There's a lot of times part-time legislators with one or two staffers. So when someone comes in and says, hey, we've got these experts on gun laws, and they've written it up. Don't you worry about it. They dumped the thing there.
Donated to your campaign.
And they've donated your campaign. That is that's a really powerful thing. I think one of the sort of subtext here, to get really nerdy for a second, is that we would all be better off with larger staffs of state reps and state senators. That sounds like a really weirdly technical place to end up with the horrible death of a 17-year-old, but I think that's actually part of what's going on here.
Well, because you realize so much policy is not driven by research; it's driven by paranoia, by rhetoric, by how you want to be perceived. And these kinds of laws are a perfect example of that.
Lisa Grace from the Center for Media Democracy, a longtime ALEC tracker. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
How the Million Hoodie March and Occupy Wall Street came together or didn't, right after this.